So thank you for joining us, and we are excited about this program. It's called Law Firm Culture, Let's Get Real. Should have said Buenos Dias, a lot of you know, or Buenos Tardes, because it's late afternoon. I'm coming to you live from Buenos Aires, where my colleague Tim and I have been working with the Association of Corporate Counsel down here for the last week, and I'd never been here before, and it is just a fabulous city and country, and I will be back. But now we're going to talk about something equally exciting to Buenos Aires, and that is law firm culture. But we're going to sort of take the rose-colored lenses off and really tell it as we think we see it. So let's get real. We know that entities anywhere, but we're going to particularly focus on law firms and law departments, have really varying and sometimes unclear perceptions about the cultures of their organization. But no matter what you may say the culture is of your organization, your actions speak louder than words. And so what you do is actually what drives your culture. And we're going to talk a lot about that and some of the difficulties and problems and issues. And our provocative panel is going to bring a wide range of perspectives. So they're going to identify where culture presents some challenges and then the steps to make it better. By the way, I'm Terri Gavulic. I think I know almost everybody on the call, but in case I don't, I'm the CEO of TerraLex and a fellow in the college. And I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today. I'll start with Amanda Brady, who many of you know because she's also a fellow in the college. Amanda is the managing director and the chief operating officer of the Alexander Group. And she has more than 30 years of legal industry experience, including 20 years as a leading search executive, serving in AmLaw 100 law firms, major corporations. She does recruiting in the C-suite, board members, executives. She also provides clients with market trend and operational intelligence. And she has previously served in a COO role in a national law firm. So she brings a lot of varied perspectives that you'll get to hear in a little bit. Also on our panel today is Jordan Furlong, another fellow in the college and the principal of Law 21. Jordan is a legal sector analyst, an author, a speaker, and a consultant. He forecasts new developments and discerns emerging patterns in the legal ecosystem. Jordan's currently focused on serving clients in the areas of lawyer formation, lawyer education and licensing, and legal services regulation. And the fourth of our panelists, I'll include myself in there, is Tyrone Thomas. And I'm going to give his little introduction, but I have to say that it doesn't do him justice. So if you really want to learn about Tyrone, you should listen to our podcast at TerraLex that I did with Tyrone that tells more than what I'm about to read about his job. But Tyrone has more than a decade of development and energy experience. He is the Deputy General Counsel at Plus Power. But in that time that he's been working in this area, he's led diverse teams of professionals in dozens of acquisitions, dispositions, and debt equity financing of utility scale energy generation and storage projects. And prior to joining his current company, Plus Power, he was a key member of the legal team at Invenergy, where he led a team of 26 lawyers and paraprofessionals, and he oversaw multiple focus areas such as real estate, permitting, special projects. Tyrone he's also spent time in private practice at DLA Piper. He has a lot of very interesting passions and perspectives. He spoke, for example, at a TerraLex meeting couple months ago in the DEI space. So I'm really delighted to have all of our panelists join us, and we are going to kick right into it. So in preparing for this session, I was kind of reminded about this employee that I'd heard about who was reading company materials from the company handbook. It was a new employee, and he was excited to read about all these references to a culture that supports professional advancement and rewards achievement and all the different things that you can get as a new employee at his company. When he was reading, he happened to look up from the handbook and he gazed out the window, and there he saw the boss drive up in a beautiful BMW Series 7 and watched as the boss entered in the building. And when the boss passed by this new employee, his name was John, the employee said, "Boss, that is a great car. I really think," he's trying to make small talk, schmooze up to the boss. And the boss smiled and he said, "If you also work hard and you're punctual and you put in more hours of work on the weekends, you take fewer holidays, you achieve your targets, well, then I'll be able to buy an even bigger car next year." So I just thought that'd be a great example of how you can say one thing and do another, and guess which part of that is going to win. So you have it. It's the big challenge of culture. Your actions have to match your words, or else your actions are going to define your organization's culture, not what you say in your nice materials or your employee handbooks. It isn't what your branding messages or your handbooks say, and it's not what you aspire to be. It's actually the context setter for everything that your organization does, and it's the evidence of your organization's values. So that's sort of my loose definition of culture, but it's a way of interacting that contributes to this unique kind of social and psychological environment of your organization, because it's based on strongly held and widely shared beliefs within the organization. And those have to be supported by strategy and by structure. And oh, if it was only that simple, but as you're about to hear, it's not. So let's start off with a little diagnosis. And for this, I'm going to turn to you, Jordan, and ask you to give us your theses, which I know is all around the fact that culture seems to have gone off the rails in a lot of organizations. Tell us about that.
Terri, thank you, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And yeah, it's remarkable the coincidences that come from time to time, because around the same time I was prepping for this panel, I was also writing an article about law firm culture, and I don't know, I guess that had been a long day or a long week or a long pandemic, and I tweeted out something along the lines of, you know, I'm writing an article on law firm culture, excoriating is the key word. And it's remarkable the reaction. I got like well over 100 reactions, responses, and chimings in, and so forth. And you know, and one of them was an email that I got from a lawyer in the U.S. Used to be a partner at a large regional law firm. He gave it up. He went and took a public sector role instead. And we corresponded for a bit, and with his permission, I want to just read for you a couple of excerpts, because he was talking about the culture of his firm. And the reason I want to sort of read this at the start is because I think it nicely illustrates the commonality, the common features that seem to come up in almost every conversation I have, not all, but almost every conversation with regard to a law firm culture. And he was describing some of the highlights. So just doing a very quick parse here, describing partners who were, I beg your pardon, assholes, or threw objects at people with little repercussion because they brought in money. The routine devaluing of work by managers, you know, and I thought, I mean, that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but that happens all the time, the belittling and the criticism. Never managed to have extra comp for associates and young partners, but we can always pay six-figure bonuses to the leaders, or signing bonuses for new recruits. And I thought, man, right there, you know, this is the thing. Sorry, 30-second sidebar. This is the thing that law firms do. They're always chasing the new thing, right? You offer a great discount to get a new client, while the loyal client you've had for 10 years is paying your rack rates. You know, you go out and you wine and dine the new lateral to bring them in, and the partners who've been there for a long time, you know, here's your daily serving of bupkis. So, you know, so it's that, and the word he really came up with was just hypocrisy, you know. And I thought that really, this goes back to the point you made, Terri, at the start, about the disconnect between what the firms say and what the firms actually do and what it's actually like there. And I suspect sometimes it's the hypocrisy that just grinds people the most, that gets them kind of upset. But you asked about you know, what got us here, how do we get to the point where culture is kind of run off the rails? And I have a few points to make, and these are not state secrets, right? This is not anything that almost everybody on this call doesn't either know or hasn't experienced or hasn't heard, or all these things. This is the classic case of, as Krusty the Clown would say, saying the quiet part loud. But anyway, so there's a few reasons why law firm culture is the way it is. And you know what a big one is we don't talk about a whole lot? There's too many lawyers. Right? There's too many lawyers. I know this sounds like snark. It's not meant to be. There's too many lawyers relative to everybody else, to other, you know, professionals and technicians and workers and staffers, and you've got this like immense density of you know, lawyershness, this gravitational well, just all kind of crammed together, right? And we know, those of us who've been around, and we've have had a chance to benefit from Dr. Larry Richards' assessment of lawyer personality, and we know what those personality traits are, right? Low on sociability, high on skepticism, right? Low on empathy, high on urgency and demand, right? And so I think it's because there are so many lawyers that make up the majority of the personnel, then there's not enough normal people around. Sorry, normal. I'll use the industry term, non-lawyers, to counteract that. So that's something I don't think we notice as much. There's the obvious suspects, right? The compensation system could not be designed, I think, more accurately to be able to generate this sense of a zero-sum game, where every dollar that the partner down the hall takes in terms of draws or profits and so forth, that's $1 fewer for me, right? And this sense of being aggrieved and resentment really kind of comes from that. And a lot of it too, I think, resides in this idea, which has permeated business culture to everybody's detriment for the last few decades, of shareholder value. You know, like this whole thing with, thank you, Milton Friedman, because we've had decades of businesses saying the highest goal, the highest value is profits for shareholders, continuity for shareholders. And I'm sure we've all seen at this point that great New Yorker cartoon, right, of the guy in the, you know, ripped, ragged, tattered suit sitting in a cave by a fire with all the children gathered around saying, well, sure, we destroyed the planet, but for a brief shining moment, we produced a ton of shareholder value, right? So this has been the business world, and it has, I think, permeated law firms to an extraordinary extent, because of course, this is the ultimate measure in our profession of success. Profit per partner is the shareholder value system. Right? So keeping the partners profitable, getting them more profits this year than they had last year, more profits than the guy down the hall they don't like, that's the supreme value. And if the most important thing is to keep the partners happy and profitable, then everything else is going to take back seat to that, if not the third or fourth or fifth seat. You know, and I remember sometimes what a friend of mine in the consulting business once said about law firms. He described them as a collection of egos connected by central heating. And yes, that is harsh, and that is more than a little cynical. But the way I look at it is, a phrase you do not hear very much in this context is, we're acting in the best interests of the law firm, right? We're acting in the best interest of the firm. The collective is more important than the individual, which is really just not part of the culture. So for me anyway, I mean, if we're looking at kind of root causes, and that's what I'm going to try to establish here at the start, I really think a lot of it comes down to, it has been a loss, for lack of a better term, of a sense of higher value, a sense of purpose. You know, Terri, as you know, I used to, you know, fly around and, you know, go to law firm retreats and meetings, and I would get up on stage and I would talk whatever I yapped about to people. And at the end, I would say something like, you know, a law firm is not a pizza parlor. It's not a hair salon. It is, or it is supposed to be, a pillar of the community that it's in. It's supposed to be a different kind of business, a professional, a service business. And I really believe that. Not fully clear to me that many lawyers do. So, and the reason I mention values is that on the occasions when I talk about culture to law firms, and this is actually part of what that you know, mythical article I was writing, was essentially, look, and this touches what you mentioned at the opening, Terri. It comes down to values. I can tell what your values are by your actions, right? Your statement of values on the website or in the policy manual and the strategic plan, it's nothing, right? It doesn't have any value, and your actions determine what your actions demonstrate your values, and the response to your actions, that becomes your culture. And this is the point I try to make in the article, is that culture is not something that you, as a leader of a law firm, you're not directing it, you're not designing it, you're not deploying it. So culture is an outcome. Culture is a result. It is fundamentally, it's a diagnostic, right? It's a symptom or a sign to you that something's gone wrong. And if you've got a bad culture, if you've got a poor culture, this is a strong signal to you that something's gone wrong with your firm. If your firm, the babying of partners and the assignment of the highest value to profits. And I'm not saying law firms shouldn't make money. I think making money is great. I endorse it. But when it's the highest value you got, then your firm is kind of messed up. And a bad culture is your firm's way of telling you it's kind of messed up. So that's kind of like an opening stab at how we got to where we're at today.
Well, I promised provocative, so thank you for kicking that off that way. No, I listen, it's got to be said, right? So, but there are solutions, and I don't want people to necessarily throw in the towel here. And I've been encouraged by some firms I've read in the news, or even some of our own members, that are taking actions that drive their culture in different ways, whether that's in pro bono, DEI, or other kinds of space like that. So there is hope. And Tyrone, maybe you could give us some perspectives on it's a very unique way you have of thinking about this that might help firms improve their culture. And I'll just let you go from there rather than me say what you're going to say.
Sure. Thank you, Terri and Jordan. I too endorse making money. So I appreciate that. And you know, I'm jesting a little bit, but I think to say that at the outset that we cannot deny that profitability is an imperative, and it's one of the higher imperatives of any for-profit venture. It's in the name, for-profit. But that the tension between culture or any moral imperative and a commercial imperative is not one that, to the point Jordan made earlier, has to be a zero-sum game. I think that tension, and when we see this in all manner of industry, when you have that tension between the technical and the creative, you produce the best results, right? And when you can leverage that tension in the right way and make sure that one doesn't win over the other, that's the balance that you're thinking about. So that's 50,000 feet, right? And let's zoom in a bit. The thesis from my perspective is simple. Instead of allowing the individual to only look out for themselves, and therefore the collective to not truly be a collective as it's defined, if you focus on the development of the individual contributor, lowercase I, lowercase c here, right? It doesn't really matter where in the organization you are, then you can actually make the team better and then make the whole organization better, because you are figuring out how you can get the best out of each of your individual people, and you're creating this, you're instilling this sense of intrinsic motivation in each of those people to do the best that they can while they are with you. So what does that look like? If I were to boil it down, because we don't have all day here, I would say it's candor. It is organizations, I think, to the first point that Jordan made, trying to think through the culture that they want to have, and think through and have candor, right? Have self-candor to say, you know, rather than it's gumdrops and rainbows on paper, and then the actual thing is, 14th century dungeon, right? Let's talk about what's realistic. It is a business. It is a for-profit business. It is an industry where hard charging is the norm and sometimes is a necessity. And there's a middle ground somewhere that is different for each firm, that you can say, this is what we do. This is what you're going to experience. This is what you're going to give up, and this is what you're going to get. And that candor then flows through to the individuals, flows through to recruiting. Here is what you're joining. I think one of the issues at the more junior level in the legal industry is between the law schools and a lot of entry-level jobs. There's a lot of lying, for lack of a better word, about what exactly the people are getting into. And I think that if you told the truth, you wouldn't necessarily lose everyone, but the people that you did get would be people who went in eyes open and would be more likely to latch on to whatever it is that you're providing. And so there's self-candor in setting up the structure. What are we? There is candor towards the individual and telling them what they're getting into. And then there's candor all along the development process in acknowledging, for example, as many firms are set up, especially the larger ones, that there will be attrition. Sometimes attrition is in the model. Other times it's just highly statistically likely. There's a lot of churn in the market right now. And when I'm doing planning for 22 for staffing, I'm obviously going to build in a certain amount of attrition, because otherwise I'm setting myself up for pain in the future. And so if you acknowledge that there will be attrition, and you acknowledge all these things that we say separately, that these people could come back to the firm, that people could send business to the firm, people could become clients of the firm, or otherwise just you could like them as people, which is totally okay as a lawyer, then you can develop the person holistically in a way that acknowledges that their career probably won't end here. A 24, 25, 26, 27-year-old that you hire is not going to retire from your organization, most likely. And if you acknowledge that, and if you develop them so that their career path is boosted in a way that in the short time that or the long time that they're with your organization, they can actually provide value there, and you acknowledge that, now you've got someone who feels like, as long as it makes sense for me, I can stay, I should stay. If I decide I want to pivot, maybe the organization can talk to me about another opportunity. And you get away from this culture of silence around anything other than one route, right? There's this idea, and I remember it as a young associate, that it is disloyal to say that I don't want to be partner. I see people who are pro bono partners. I see people who move into biz dev roles. I see people who move into operational roles. I see people who are managing the executive committees of these large firms and really, as they joke, are not practicing law. I have no idea how they got into those roles, however, because I have to want to be not only a partner, but just like the partner who may be throwing things at me because they did not like the color of pen I used on my draft. And I think that, I mean, that's the crux of it. I think we can quickly get away from these things by just acknowledging the reality and by developing the people with an understanding that their career is going to be long. And it will ultimately redound to our benefit if we are remembered fondly if and when they move on. I'm going to pause there because I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you, Tyrone. And I should have said, if you have questions, you can raise your virtual hand or put it in the chat. And we do have a good question from Andrew. Andrew asked, what are the triggering events that get law firm management to recognize that their firm has a culture and B, to want to change it? I'm going to throw it to the panel, but I'll throw one out there just as a starting point. And that is when a firm goes into a merger discussion or to be acquired discussion. That's one right there that really opens eyes. Jordan, Tyrone, or Amanda, do you have any other suggestions for triggering events that help the firm to realize, oh, we do have a culture and it's not what we said in our website? Anybody? I can throw another one out. It's what Tyrone just said. And I think it's when you start to have a lot of attrition and you can't figure out why people aren't loving you the way you want them to.
That's exactly what I was about to say. That's exactly what I was about to say. The number of people who have a ton of attrition and are sitting around scratching their heads, wondering like a Far Side cartoon, what's happening. and you might not know exactly why, but it's clearly you. At a minimum, it's you. Now let's figure out what you're doing that's causing this attrition.
You're the common denominator, right? That's what you have to figure out, which actually brings up something that I was thinking, Tyrone, when you were talking, and the combination of Jordan's comment about profitability. And you're right. We're all in business to make a profit as organizations, and frankly, as an individual. I'm in business to make a profit. But what you were talking about, Tyrone, in developing people as a part of the process just makes me think of the old adage that, a rising tide raises all ships. So if there's a way to incorporate that concept in your discussion, in your internal discussions around culture, then there's still a benefit. Ultimately, it's still the individual benefit, not the collective benefit in the end, but the individual benefit is also there to invest in these different pieces of the process as people are developed. And it's not just the PPP or PPEP as it is these days. What are, Tyrone, I'm curious, because you're leading an in-house organization. And that's a little bit different than a law firm organization. So what are you doing in your organization vis-a-vis culture and trying to develop it or change it if you think it's changeable?
So I'm going to acknowledge that I have a little bit of a benefit because I'm in an organization that would be considered a startup now, recently transitioned. And so culture is a part and parcel of, everyone here has been in other organizations in our industry. And so everyone comes to this with what they liked and didn't like. And so there's a very specific founding set of principles. There is a big push on getting rid of certain items that create a lot of mental drag and keep the work from getting done. So it's a very limited meeting culture with people who push for the agendas, end it early if it's not going well, not camera on all of the time. There's a lot of elements around that. And so I don't have to build as much. But in jobs past, I've definitely had to do a lot of building of that culture. And I will tell you that the one sad benefit is when other organizations are doing so little, you only have to do a little bit to start to show people that you are listening. Some of it could be recognition for, just stopping and recognizing on transactions as opposed to rolling into the next one. Some of it could be as simple as calling folks out when they have things that sound stupid but are free, when they have work anniversaries. Some of it could be, talking to folks when you notice that they haven't taken a vacation for a long period of time and there's a ton of work, and reminding them that this work will always be here. Let's just talk transition, let's structure it, and then you should go. And it can be any of those things. I remember a boss many years ago where I would close a really hard deal and he would say, take your wife out to dinner, go somewhere nice, and send me the bill. And, it was, we made $700 million in this deal, and he was giving me what, 300 to go to dinner. But it stuck with me. It still sticks with me that he used to do that, and that he would acknowledge those late nights and early mornings and what was being pushed. And so a lot of it is the candor, a lot of it is the acknowledgement, a lot of it is the understanding that you still have to get the work done, but I'm going to acknowledge as a person how much it can at times suck when we're in a crunch.
There's some phenomenal chatter going on, by the way, in the chat, so I encourage people to look at that. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, and just to add a thought to that, around the original question of, what do you need to do to, what's the triggering event? And part of the problem is that any triggering event related to culture is going to look differently to different people within the firm, right? I don't know if anybody here has seen Snowpiercer, this really quite awesome action movie starring, among other, Chris Evans in a very non-Captain America kind of role. And it's a sci-fi movie, and the idea is that in the future, the world is a frozen ice ball, and there's a train that circles endlessly, and this train is incredibly long, and the whole back of it is essentially filled with people crammed into horrible, awful conditions. And then the further up you move, then it gets to be nicer, then it's like luxurious, then it's just extraordinary at the front. And of course, the analogy couldn't be clearer. But the issue is that when problems in what a law firm does, in the choices it makes, in the actions of its leaders, in the values that it prioritizes, and in the in the resolution of conflicts over priorities, right? Because so like one priority could be we want to make sure that we get as much profit for the partners this year. Another priority could be we want to make sure that this associate doesn't get burned out by client demands. And it's like one of those playoff brackets, right? The number 1 seed is pardon profit. Number 16, the plucky underdog, is being the whoa. Well, that was a blowout win, as expected for the favorite, right? But it manifests differently. So if you are at the back end of the train, then you look around and say the culture here is terrible. But if you're at the front end of the train, you're like, I don't experience the same culture that you do. I don't see this the same way that you do. And as I'm kind of said in this article, the lower you are on the org chart, I think generally the clearer your picture of what the culture actually is like. So it's very difficult to reconcile that disconnect between how culture is perceived, whereas in the sense that even if there's a problem, the people who could solve the problem don't actually understand the nature of the problem. And that's a tough bridge to cross.
Yeah. Before I turn it over to Amanda, I do have one more question I wanted to ask Tyrone, because if you're looking in the chat, as I mentioned, there's some great conversations going on. Some of it is around the client's point of view on all of this. And Tyrone, do clients care about a law firm's culture? What impact does it have? Since you're a resident client on the panel.
They do. They care a great deal. Well, we're not a monolith, right? A number of clients care in terms of the client contact, right? Those client contacts, similar as we talk about junior associates developing business with friends and then rising up, those client contacts are more and more senior in the organization. And then there are folks in the investing class who are also coming in laterally and putting pressure on a variety of other organizations to meet certain ESG metrics. And a lot of those metrics are overlaying pretty nicely with the discussion we're having here in culture. The issues of recruitment, retention, and advancement of everyone. Yes, of women and people of color, but of everyone are, those are culture issues in many contexts. And when you see a lack of, I'm going to use the word advancement year to year, because there's a lot of reporting, right? A lot of data is being gathered. When you see a lack of advancement year to year in those areas, when you see those, and I saw we talked in the chat about the net attrition numbers versus the gross attrition numbers, I think that's a very real point. When you see that data changing or not changing year to year, you realize that as problem solvers, which we all are, we're not putting our real attention on this particular problem. And so what we do about it is different. And I say that the reason I was talking about people becoming more seniors is because sometimes people are not empowered to really do something about it. But more and more people are becoming empowered, and more organizations are realizing that it's a commercial prerogative in many ways, because there are people who I connect with personally who want to make sure that culture is good, who have realized that coming at from the investment arm is probably the best possible way to do it. And the responsible investing community becoming more widespread and having a stronger footing, as you've seen on the fossil fuel side, what's happened there, is making a lot of the clients care, is making a lot of the clients ask questions, and is making a lot of the clients start to collect that data. And when you collect that data, I can tell you from the side of the person who will sit and go through data from 100 law firms, it's stark. Everyone could be doing better, but there's 20% who's just crushing the other 80. And it's stark. And those law firms, you know, aside from the international admiralty lawyers among them, they are to some degree fungible when you take the relationship out of the equation. And that's where the needle's moving. There's a lot of folks, myself included, who have I'm just gonna let the data speak. I'm gonna pull this information. I know from the industry who's coming and going at these different shops. But we're gonna pull that information. We're gonna start to, and I think this is the shift from the CSR to ESG, which has been really beneficial. Let's look at the data. Let's figure out how to get it in a way that it's as truthful as it can be. And then let's compare it. And from there, we're no longer talking about what we feel. We're talking about apples and apples. But I can tell you, we're all gathering that data. The question is just what we're doing with it. And people care very much.
Thank you. So I want to give Amanda a chance. Oh, go ahead, Amanda.
Sorry, just one follow-up to that comment, Tyrone. I'm curious as to whether there is data. Ultimately, do you believe that the GCs of the world, the clients, what's their bottom line? Because they still have to have what they believe is the right service results from their law firms. A lot of them are demanding certain things from a diversity standpoint, and they have been for years, right, for that. But they haven't pushed on it as hard as they are now. And I'm just curious as to whether it really is about the net results, or whether there's more, in your opinion, more of a movement just because it's the right thing to do.
I think there's a lot of people who believe it's the right thing to do. And in the large organizations, you're going to run into a lot of people who really don't care. They care because because it matters, right? There's commercial consequences. They care. Mm-hmm. The reality is, like we were talking about at the beginning, you can leverage that tension, right? If the moral case becomes the business case, we're all aligned. And what we've seen in the industry, I would say over the past decade, and interestingly enough, is law firms that realize I can differentiate myself from this also ran by not doing much, because the baseline is low, right? I am a black male attorney. The baseline is low. But you see this firm doing year over year improvements, and you see another one not. You see someone trying these different initiatives, and you see other folks that are not. They're they're trying to differentiate themselves from the pack. And that movement has allowed certain GCs to be more aggressive because, to your point, I can now get the service at the level I want. Right? Now it's I'm just making this up here, but now, Cadwalader won't do this, but White and Case will. I'm okay now. I don't have to talk to someone and say, I'm not getting one of the 7 panel firms that this bank has to use, because I am getting one of them, and they don't really care why. And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing certain shops that are doing that differentiation. Still a small percentage, but they're trying. I don't know why, but that allows us to do that very thing. That allows us to say, I can close a $1.5 billion deal with one of the few firms that this bank wants to transact business with, and I'm going to lean towards the one that actually shows me that they are trying to align with our cultural imperative.
Got it. Great.
So, Andrew, thank you for asking such a triggering question, and we will save time at the end for questions. I do want to move on a little. I do think that if you sum up what I heard, it's sort of like that old story about, 8 blind men were touching an elephant and they each described something different. I think you have to ask all 8 blind men what their experience is with that elephant to understand, to start to paint a picture of your culture. And it's a multifaceted approach. So thank you, everybody. So Amanda, we can't ignore the fact, and here's what's interesting. We can't ignore the fact that we're in a pandemic, and that the pandemic and the return to work has had a huge, I'm sorry, not to work, we've all been working our butts off, but the return to the office has had a huge impact on law firm cultures. And when we were prepping for this session, 3-4 weeks ago, the story was very different than it's starting to look now, because people were returning to the office. And now we're seeing, at least in some parts of the world and increasingly elsewhere, we're hearing about schools going back to virtual, people going back to work from home. So I don't know if that's going to impact the remarks you had planned on making, but tell us a little bit about your perspectives on this, on the pandemic and its impact on culture.
Right. Yes, the world changes regularly, as we've seen, and culture has always been evolving. It's just that the pandemic, I think, is causing things to happen much faster, and we have to make difficult decisions and face these challenges. Whereas we as an industry, any industry, frankly, could delay many of the conversations. Most of you who know me know that I work on the business side of executive search. So, and most of the folks on this call are on the business side of law firms and legal departments. So you're not the problematic lawyers with the DNA issues that you have to deal with, and you have to manage, and you have to try to bring along in this conversation regarding culture. But a couple of things, just thinking about talent and return to office, Terri, to your point, return to office, that I've pulled from conversations with a number of both law firm COOs and managing partners, et cetera. The issue of return to work is impacting the culture and just fundamental law firm operations. So a couple of things that have been brought to my attention when you're trying to figure out what is your culture, you might want to start with surveying your employees, your clients, the recruiters you engage to help you find your talent for your firm, not just the attorney recruiters, the business recruiters, because your business leaders are clearly just as critical to this process as the lawyers are, really to help you understand the perception of the firm's culture, which may differ from the aspirations, and that's already been mentioned. We say one thing, we want something different. How do we close the gap? But understanding what the perceptions are and how they may be changing, particularly how they may be changing depending on what you're requiring of folks in this new environment, and how you're handling the whole, your firm is handling the whole return to office situation, as you do that, as you investigate the perceptions of the firm's culture, you'll also want to make sure you communicate what you believe your culture to be. We've also touched on that a little bit already, both to your own people and externally, as well as those you're recruiting to the firm. You can always tweak your message and your description as you need to, but being able, and I think this has always been true, being able to succinctly articulate your culture in such a way as to allow others to believe that you believe it to be true, and it will continue to be a critical component of attracting and keeping talent, again, across the board, both in the attorney ranks and in the business ranks. One quick aside, story that I've heard from Hogan Levels is that they never miss an opportunity to talk about their culture in firm events, on Zooms, whatever it is, they're talking about it. I hope what they say is accurate, and I hope their people believe it. If they don't believe it, they'll probably leave. And Jordan, you've sort of touched on some of that as well. But as you consider bringing on other groups or firms into the organization, even as you promote and communicate your vision of your culture, you'll likely need to make allowances for local market differences in expectations. You know, a multi-office firm where the firm's culture needs to be clearly communicated, but it may be customary for one office to dress differently, or one office to location to come into the office more frequently than others, depending on sort of the situation on the ground in those environments. So keeping that in mind, but just know that, as always, flexibility is key, but your people are watching to make sure that you don't overly favor the perception of overly favoring one group over another. That has always been the case. They act like they're not watching, but they actually are. Again, on the whole return to work, real estate and space, firms are really thinking hard, rethinking how to use their real estate, unloading some real estate, reconfiguring office spaces to hot desking or hoteling. Even with these changes, think carefully about how you handle allocation of office space, because there could be unintended consequences of your decisions. You know, traditionally, the protocol was the most senior partners got the best offices, all partners got windows and larger space, even if they didn't show up that often before the pandemic, much less now. Now, a number of firms, particularly those who have let go of space, are allocating space based on which practices are spending more time in the office, simply because of the nature of their practices. Litigators, you know, maybe getting ready for trial, transactions groups as they prepare for closings, they need space. They're demanding more space. They're showing up more often. And so they're often getting what they ask for, but others can still be put off by the fact that they may be more senior and still not getting what they think they deserve. That I don't know, that's a human nature thing. And Jordan, you may be better at interpreting what that actually means than I can, but I know that it's true. I know that it's true. No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, and I think it's, well, the human nature aspect of it has to be, I think, confronted, because these are, again, in the larger senses, these are not evil machinations we're talking about. We are not talking about evil geniuses running law firms and, you know, trying, exactly, you know, they're not setting out to create Barad-dûr in law offices, even though it's what some people kind of feel like. But you know, Amanda, your point about the pandemic, I think, was exactly right in this case, and the whole question of returning to the office, because from the point of view of a number of people in the firm, especially administrative staff and paralegals and clerks and so forth, people who are taking public transit to get to the office, and their perspective on this is, okay, here's what I want you to understand: coming back to the office could kill me. You know, and it could not be more stark in terms of the messages that are being tried to communicated. And so if the most important thing for you is that I come back to the office, then I have to sort of think that it's more important to you that I'm back in the office than that I live. and it's at a certain point, we kind of go past parity a little bit. And what I sometimes think it comes down to, and this goes back to the question of how do you gain the attention of leadership? How do we make the change happen? And we've seen all these stories, unfortunately, of people who have been caught out or overheard or something saying something awful or doing something horrible and so forth, and they make a statement afterwards, and they always say something like, you know, that's not who I am, right? And we've all heard that in the various apologies. That's not really who I am. But it is, but it's not who you want to think you are. And I think for a lot of law firms, a lot of leaders, that's the issue that culture brings up. They sort of say, well, that's what the culture you're describing, that's not who we are. And the one thing I'm trying to do these days with law firms is to say, please consider the possibility that the culture of the firm might be different than what you think it is. And that everything that flows from that affects recruitment and recruits and advancement and return to the office and so forth. And I guess this goes back to Tyrone's point, which I think is the most apt of all. It's candor, right? Honesty. Be honest with yourselves, first of all, about what kind of place this is. If it's the kind of place where people get burned out and make a lot of money in the process, own that. You know, lean into it. You might as well, because you will attract more people who clearly want that kind of lifestyle, and you won't bait and switch all these poor folks coming in saying, this is not what you said in your statement of values. So honestly, it really comes down to me, the candor is, I just think, so essential.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amanda, were you done with your remarks? Or
well, I think just to a couple of comments. Absolutely, Jordan, the messaging is accurate or not. The messaging indicates how you value people as well as practices, and whether you consider them support, even practices support or ancillary, people support or critical. And to your point about people saying, look, it might kill me. If I have to get on public transit, I might actually die. You know, some people will go, that's a bit ridiculous, it's too extreme an opinion, but you know what, their belief is their reality, and that's what you have to work with. So I wouldn't bother trying to change their mind if that's what they believe, and that's what they believe, and you can either work with it or not. It's your choice as a manager to do that. Similarly, I guess a couple of quick things as you think about those things is think about how you also address those issues with new hires, because so many people out there are asking the question, what's the return to office policy? What will happen? And you better make sure that your policy is actually a policy for everyone, because it won't fly if the new folks get to do something different than the ones who have been around for a while, notwithstanding the fact that you might desperately need whatever their critical skill set is. It won't last long. Plus, if you want your new hires to blend into the existing culture, you really need to be very intentional about pulling them into the organization and engaging them with the organization. Still, a lot of people have been hired into firms and they haven't been to a firm event. They haven't met many people, if any, live. That is actually still the case. And so really being intentional about pulling them in and helping to create relationships just to get the stickiness the goal is to keep them around. So, so you want them to be sticky. And if you don't go through that process, they probably won't stick because there are too many people giving them phone calls every single day.
Multiple times every single day.
Yeah.
Amanda, so incredibly helpful. And as you were speaking, I just wanted to lean over to the bookshelf because I have nothing and make no money from this book, but I really love this book, Leading at a Distance. It came out right at the beginning of the pandemic. I can put it in the chat here, and I just something that was really critical. I saw it in some article somewhere, and like, hey, these folks wrote this with the idea of leading remote teams. And you know, like any book you read, it's not all gospel, but there are some good points in this book that I've actually been able to incorporate into you know, I lead a remote team into doing what I do. But you raised a point which is really, really interesting to me about when you think about the dissonance between people wanting to come back into the office and almost the dismissal sometimes of the potential concerns of what someone else is saying, why they don't want to, irrespective of what the objective reality is. Do you think there's a corollary between that and the culture conversation around, you know, if you get snippets and you're at the top of what the culture might be, and it varies differently from what you believe the culture is, do you see a parallel there in the just ignoring it, right? Just sort of rejecting it out of hand. Say, that's not the culture, this is the culture. Because I think the COVID example is really fresh in everyone's mind.
I think it has always been true, to follow on Jordan's point a minute ago. The folks lower in the rank know exactly what the culture is in any organization. I don't care what you put on your website. I don't care what you say in your firm meetings. They know exactly what the culture is because they're the ones who probably are most greatly impacted by it. So, you know, you can't hide from it.
Yeah.
But I do believe that you can. There is hope. Terri said this earlier. There is hope. I mean, culture is sort of the result and the reactions to certain things today, but it can change. You can change it. You have to be intentional about it, and you have to be sincere, and you have to get enough people on board to try to begin to think differently about things. But it can change, and actually, Tyrone, I think to your point, there are firms that you can point to because there's data that says they have been changing their culture, and that didn't happen by chance. That happened by design.
Well, and you know, it's interesting. I wrote down when you all were talking, field of dreams. If you build it, you know, it will come, but it's not, it has to be, you have to build it with actions, aspirations, and words. So every time you say within your firm, for example, that we value teamwork, and then your compensation system is eat what you kill. I mean, you have to look at every single solitary aspect and make sure that actions and words match up to be the culture that you're trying to change to. I have seen organizations change their culture though, but it takes a long time. You can't just strategic plan it into being. It doesn't happen that way. I cannot believe we are coming to the last 5 minutes of this program, and this, not just the panel has been terrific, but the audience has had really phenomenal conversations in the chat. So I did want to give the audience just a chance or two to ask a couple of questions or make some points that you wanted to make if anyone wants to speak up. Anybody, just raise your virtual hand and I will call on you. I'm not seeing any virtual hands. Let's see. Okay, so then I will let the panelists sort of wrap it up a little bit. And Jordan, I'm going to start with you, and maybe you could just share a little bit about what do law firms and law department leaders, besides some of the great things that have already come out, what else do they need to be doing or thinking about? Oh, you're on mute. I knew I'd get to say it at least once today.
And I knew it, and I figured I'd be the person to do it. All right, if we're going to talk a little bit brighter, a little bit cheerier at the end, because I've not been the cheeriest person here today. Here, look. Here is a cheery way to look at this whole thing. Fundamentally, I think the way to present this to leaders, because my belief is that it is absolutely squarely in the wheelhouse of leaders. That is not just the managing partner and the practice group leaders, but the people, the individuals with influence and power within a firm, and that will vary from place to place. But it absolutely rides on them because as I say, my theory on this is that culture results from actions. Actions are driven by values. So it's the opportunity to identify those values, to do kind of a values inventory of your own of your firm, and say, okay, this is what we believe we want. This is what our data and our inquiries are telling us. How do we close that gap? And the way that I would kind of pitch this is in any of this thing is to a leader is that this is an opportunity. This is a moment, this is where you start turning things around. This is your legacy. This is what people are going to remember you for, right? Because I can guarantee you, people don't remember the last 5 or 6 managing partners or practice group leaders, except in, maybe less positive terms. This is your shot. And you don't want to pass it by, and this is the moment where something can happen. So I think that's how I would try to gear it, not as a you're terrible, not as things that stink, even though I've spent about 45 minutes saying that, but because this is your chance to be the hero or the heroine who turns it all around.
Tyrone, you have some closing thoughts you'd like to share? Amanda, I'm calling on you next, so start thinking.
I do, and I was actually dropping this in chat, but I'll say it now. Again, fantastic conversation in the chat. I do want to point out, and I know this is obvious for most people, listening, like truly listening to the thoughts and suggestions of the people within your organization does not mean you have to implement them. It feels, and I'm going to use that word, I know it's squishy, it feels to me like when I hear pushback, both at a distance and from people who I'm friends with, about opening up what they call the floodgates in terms of allowing that type of discourse, they feel like they would then have to give in to a certain amount of it, like it's a negotiation, right? And the other person started too far in the opposite direction. And I don't think that's true. I think it's really just a matter of showing people that there is a forum, right? Showing people that you are actually listening, and I think fundamentally that they're not going to be penalized for disagreeing with you. And that you can have that disagreement, you can do it in a reasonable way, and then you can move on. But I do think that just allowing that conversation is everything, right? It's just Dennis Kennedy, who is always poignant with his comments. Put hashtag psychological safety here in the chat.
Love it.
Exactly that. So I'll pause.
Great. Amanda?
Actually, I would just add on to what Tyrone was saying. In the conversation is critical, and part of the conversation as a leader, a law firm leader, may be, I don't know. I don't know the answer. We don't know the answer. We're trying to figure it out, whether it's a back to office policy or a strategic plan or any of those really critical decisions. But just acknowledging the uncertainty versus pretending to know an answer and trying to sell an answer, because people will not believe you if you're trying to sell something that you don't actually believe is true, will set people more at ease and maybe even get them in your camp so that they'll give you the courtesy of a little bit of extra time and maybe a few missteps, as long as you're trying to get it right.
And that brings us to the top of the hour, unbelievably. So much to think about. Debbie, I have a feeling we're going to need another program that's interactive, because there's so many great thinkers in the college and in our audience on this subject. I thank everybody, but especially Amanda, Jordan, and Tyrone for your participation today. It was really, really interesting. We wish everybody a happy holiday. Debbie, thank you for everything you always do for the college and for putting this together today as well. So happy holidays. I'm going to fly home now.
Thank you, Terri. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Thank all y'all.